Kamal, it's 24 hours on from the findings of the infected blood report inquiry. The Prime Minister has once again used the same phrase to describe his reaction.
Well, as I said yesterday in Parliament, it was a day of shame.
So we're going to be announcing the compensation that's been offered to victims and whether it's enough.
And then later, Lord Walney on this very important report on how to police demonstrations like Just Stop Oil or the pro-Palestinian demonstrations which affect so many people.
We're going to be discussing why the Hollywood actress is taking on the tech bros of Silicon Valley.
Welcome to the Daily Tea with me, Kamal Ahmed.
And me, Camilla Tominey. This morning, Kamal, the Prime Minister is in Vienna. He's meeting the Austrian Prime Minister there. He's once again addressed his concerns about the delay in which victims of the infected blood inquiry have been treated. They've been agitating for justice for decades. John Glenn is the Paymaster General, but in layman's terms, he's the minister in charge of the compensation package. He's been in the House of Commons addressing MPs, and this is what he said.
If you have been directly or indirectly infected by NHS blood products, or tissue contaminated with HIV or hepatitis C, or have developed a chronic infection from blood contaminated with hepatitis B, you will be eligible to claim compensation under the scheme. And where an infected person has died, but would have been eligible under these criteria, compensation will be paid to their estate. And this will include where a person was infected with hepatitis B and died during the acute period of infection. But, Mr. Speaker, Sir Brian could not have been clearer. It's not just the harm caused by the infections that requires compensation. It's also the wrong suffered by those affected that must also be compensated for. So when a person with an eligible infection has been accepted onto the scheme, their affected loved ones will be able to apply for compensation in their own right. That means partners, parents, siblings, children and friends and family who have acted as carers of those who are infected are all eligible to claim.
So he added some detail to those payments. For all beneficiaries, they will get a £210,000 payment by the end of the year. He said that those bigger payments that he just outlined in that clip we've heard would start by year end. Quite slow, some might say, but at least that £210,000 payment will come in the autumn. Importantly, all these payments would be exempt from tax, and there will be no means testing, which means that any other benefits that beneficiaries are already receiving won't be affected.
My question this morning, though, Kamal, having digested everything that Sir Brian Langstaff both wrote and said yesterday to victims and their families, is compensation ever going to be enough? Because the discussion's moved on, hasn't it? And it's moved on to the issue of responsibility and accountability. Our readers, for instance, are in favour. I think 82% of them have voted on an online poll to suggest that Lord Clark, who was Health Secretary at the time, where he said that there was no conclusive proof that HIV had infected some of the blood products that were given to haemophiliacs and others in transfusions. Some have said that he should be stripped of his peerage. It seems quite harsh to single out individuals, but the overwhelming reaction to this from the public, I think, is it's all very well having reports outlining what's happened and ministers and others sort of hand-wringing and saying lessons must be learned. Why don't heads ever roll in these situations? Taxpayers probably don't mind, by the way, spending this money because they feel that it's a just cause. But as with the Post Office inquiry, they'll be asking why the general public has to shoulder the burden of the cost and not, for instance, Fujitsu. And in the same way, they'll be asking why Big Pharma aren't paying to recompense for their own fatal mistakes.
For months, we've seen the protests against Israel's actions in Gaza, which followed the horrific events of October the 7th and the slaughter by Hamas of Jewish people. They've been taking place across the country, from the streets of London to many university campuses. There's also been anger at climate activists disrupting travel and damaging infrastructure. The key question, I think, is what is the best way to balance the right to protest with the right not to face prejudice and racism, to go to work and to exist peacefully amongst all communities? Today, Camilla, possibly the start of a journey towards a different solution.
A solution being provided by Lord Walney, formerly known as John Woodcock, the Labour and then independent MP.
That's a big, meaty report you've got there, which, how many pages is that?
Well, it's actually grown in the number of pages since the draft form, so it is now 291 pages long, more than 100,000 words, 41 recommendations within it. I'm sure you can take it to bed this evening and give me your views
But it's
tomorrow.
well worth a read. Well worth a read.
It's a 100,000-word government-commissioned review called Protecting Our Democracy from Coercion, published today. Let's just run through a few of the key findings. Overall, the overarching theme of the review is that activism has become too extreme, particularly singling out left-wing activism and making the point that the public don't like it when their lives are disrupted by protest. The suggestion comes in that protests should be restricted where activists are engaging in criminality that might merit a prison sentence, or also known as, Kamal, serious disruption. Progressive causes like anti-racism and climate change should be policed in the same way as others and not be given special treatment. The Public Order Act 1986 should be amended to stop protests which risk serious public disorder. The law should be broadened when interpreting protests that encourage terrorism. People who suffer loss as a result of protests, be they be prevented from getting to work or businesses may be attacked and criminal damage is caused, that they should be compensated. Protest organisations should also, it's suggested, contribute to policing costs, and there's greater action needed when it comes to MPs being targeted along with teachers and academics. Lord Walney joins us in the Daily Tea studio now. Quite a comprehensive piece of work. You've got it in front of you,
Indeed,
John, here. Have I summarised it adequately? What's the overall thrust of what you're saying in this report?
I think that's an excellent summary, and thank you for going through it so quickly. I think, as you suggest, my conclusion is that we have not got the balance right between our robust responsibility and desire as a country to facilitate people's right to peaceful protest, but deciding where the line should be when that crosses over into unacceptable disruption. And a key message that I want to give to the political establishment today, of which I've been part, particularly on the centre and the left, is that actually we need to catch up with the attitudes of the public, who are much clearer on this. The polling that I've done for this review shows that the public, by a very significant majority, about 70%, support the right to protest, but equally or more vehemently find the kind of disruption that is being inflicted on the lives of far too many, like blocking roads or criminal damage, completely unacceptable, and in their mind, it clearly shouldn't be allowed. And I think we've got to understand that more effectively.
I understand that the public will be in a place that might not be the same place as the protesters themselves, but how do you balance your points and the points you outlined, Camilla, when you went through the list? I think as well, Lord Walney, you do say far-right extremism is still one of the most major risks around protests and behaviour in this country, adding to the list that you outlined, Camilla. But how do we make sure, with your findings, that when it comes to demonstrations, even if they are unpopular, you are still allowed the right to protest and sometimes to be disruptive? Yeah,
absolutely. Now, protest on a range of causes, by definition almost, protest, you are against the status quo. So you're pushing for change, and we have to allow that. And that is a vital part of our democracy. But where I think that we have become often confused is in seeing this very disruptive protest, which is often based on a physical presence, even if it's not about violent action against an individual, there definitely is a physicality to it, as a means of really short-circuiting and coercing and seeking to intimidate our democracy, where actually we are really lucky, we are blessed in this country to live in a parliamentary democracy. Many people fought very hard to get to this space. And actually there are a huge range of channels that are open to people to make their point of view known. That includes lively protest to be able to make sure that what you're saying is heard about, but it does not need to trip over into that physicality, which is about short-circuiting democracy rather than being a part of the democratic process.
Can we talk about specifics, because we're grown used now to seeing different forms of protests, both on the streets of London and beyond, at sporting events and all the rest of it. So, I mean, we've been conflicted on this, haven't we, Kamal? Because we're both like to say that we're libertarians. We support the right of protest. We think it's a really important facet of democracy. We're journalists, so we're very much advocates of freedom of speech. Are we drawing the line here in saying that a protest that doesn't disrupt the public seriously is okay, but when we're looking at examples like Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil gluing themselves to the M25 or a major route through London, when we're saying that protesters go and trying to attack the Mona Lisa or disrupt Wimbledon or the rugby or anything else, that is a step too far, because it's quite difficult to draw the line. And maybe part of the problem is that there's a perception that the policing of it hasn't been equanimical. Examples were cited in the meeting I was in editorially earlier. You know, why is it that a woman silently protesting against abortion is carted away, or somebody protesting at the Sarah Everard visual is carted away, and yet in recent times we've seen people openly spouting anti-Semitic hate on the streets of London and nothing seems to happen?
Yeah, look, that balance is hugely important. And the police can have a difficult job to understand where the line can be. And I do have some sympathy with them saying, look, if you've got a big crowd of people, it can be hard to pick out protesters in the moment. But the example that you gave of the Gaza marches at the end there, Camilla, is really important. And I delayed my report. It was kind of ready to go last autumn, but then you saw the 7th of October massacres and the way that clearly that was going to be a focal point for protest. And indeed it has put a level of scrutiny on our strengthened public order framework. And it has been our public order laws have been found lacking by this. Now, it is a really unusual situation that we've got with this weekly or regular drumbeat of marches where, for all that protesters may say they are largely peaceful, there is a significant level of anti-Semitism and criminality around the edges. And the effect has been for a very large number of Jewish people in London and in other cities to have to feel that they need to avoid coming into the centre of London. And the police have been clear with others lawmakers that they just do not have the capability as it stands to say, look, the frequency of these marches, the fact that you are coming into the heart of London every single week, means that you are effectively excluding many Jewish people from that area. There has to be a better balance. The Public Order Act does not allow that at the moment. For the police to be able to say that effectively, not this week for a march, or OK, you've come into central London on all of these last weekends, this week we're going to insist that you go to a different part of London. They are clear, and I think they are right, that they can't do that in the Act as it stands. They have to judge that there is a significant risk of serious disorder, by which they mean a riot. And so the level of aggro that many Jewish people are feeling and the fear that is being built up can't be taken into account. And that isn't acceptable. And that's one of the key recommendations in the review, to enable the police to have that power.
What I really like about this is that it is in the open, and you've produced a report. There will now be consultation. There are many really important issues here. Where I feel far less comfortable, today Liberty, the campaigning group, won a court case it had taken against the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Under her watch as Home Secretary, she had actually changed the bar that meant that police could act to curtail protests, to make it a lower bar, It went from, as you say, something that was serious disruption to community life, which was significant and prolonged, to something that was simply more than minor. And she did this through a secondary instrument, as it's called, through Parliament. And Liberty took a case against that to say that the government had overstepped its powers. So what we do need, I think, is a public debate based around the points that you make, which will now be consulted on and have a proper process. Because if we are just reacting in a knee-jerk way, sort of day by day to events, I think that leads to bad law.
On the point that Lord Walney raises about the pro-Palestinian marches, Michael Gove, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Housing and the Communities, has been speaking about this today, and this is what he said.
Now, of course, I know that many of those on these marches are compassionate people, driven by a desire for peace and an end to suffering. But they're side by side with those who are promoting hate. The organisers of these marches could do everything in their power to stop that. But many, the majority, don't. We must make rapid progress to deal with the intimidatory consequences of marches by looking at their cumulative effect. We have to consider more closely how to police repeated invocations of prejudice, and we also need to ensure that organisers pay for the consequences of their actions.
On that point and making organisers pay, Dame Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, did say to the Telegraph yesterday, we reported it, that when she was in office, she tried to enact this idea of getting protesters to pay and to indeed compensate those that they've disrupted. And government lawyers just said, no, it's not workable. And that could be a point, couldn't it? That actually it's a great suggestion, but how does it work in practice?
Well, I think there are examples of government-facilitated schemes that that can signpost and help people towards being able to navigate to claim compensation. I don't think this is beyond the wit. If there is of man to do, if there is a will to put it through. Now, of course, the issue of being able to pin down organisations is going to be difficult, but you could get into questions of personal liability. There's a number of related issues there in that Michael is clearly picked up on or is developed his own thinking on a number of my recommendations in the review. And that issue of where there are illegal protests that are blocking roads and that have clearly been organised by a particular organisation, I think the public would very strongly like to be able, if they lose out, say if they miss a hospital appointment, God forbid some of the ambulances that have not been able to get through, they've not been able to get to work, to be able to actually claim damages from the protesters, make that easier to do. And then there is a separate question of organisations, I think, such as the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, who are insisting on having the weekly, high-profile, very expensive to police marches through central London. I think the latest estimate was that had cost the Met £40 million. I mean, it's a really considerable number of rest days that are being built up that have to be paid back. And again, this is about balance. When you have the ability to protest and get your views across in so many different ways, if you choose week after week to do a high-profile in-person march that has high levels of criminality that therefore needs to be extra policing, then I think it is reasonable to ask about whether a contribution to cost should be made by the organisers, or indeed for the police, and this is another one of my recommendations, for the police to say, look, every week is too much, given that this has been going on for several months and we've got other policing priorities.
They are protesting, of course, against an ongoing crisis in their eyes, and the issues that are going on in Gaza are absolutely horrific. So I think that's point one of why there is this notion of the repetition of the demonstrations. I think the second point, which is difficult, and I think both of us, Camilla, have spoken to leading police officers and officials in the police service. The debate is never about where we are in Shangri-La. It's about where we are and the alternative. And Lord Walney, if we get to a situation that the police are stopping or banning where protests can take place, there won't be 100,000 people coming down to London to have a march. There might be 500,000 people. There might be 1 million people. And the police say that that is more of a threat to public order than the present situation we find ourselves in.
I understand that argument. I respect it. And there are incredible people who say, look, this is a pressure valve. But I think an alternative way of looking at it is actually if you are placing many thousands of people in an environment where there is high degrees of anti-Semitism, where there is support for Hamas, where people are chanting from the river to the sea, then actually there is at least a stronger case that you are potentially bringing people into the orbit of potential radicalisation and normalising completely unacceptable behaviour. So I understand the argument, but ultimately I don't think I buy it.
Although this suggestion, I think, of yours, and I hope this hasn't been distorted by the media, but the idea of a light prescribing of some groups, including Just Stop Oil and Palestinian Action, that seems to be quite incongruous when you consider that the government won't prescribe the Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
Well, that's a really good point. And what I'm putting forward is indeed a mechanism to restrict the activities of organisations whose mode of promoting change is through clear criminal actions. Now, if there were that mechanism, it would not be for me to prescribe that. It would be the Home Secretary. And I think you look at the way that prescription for terrorist organisations work, and you see actually that though it's not perfect, but being able to restrict those organisations is effective. And so looking at that, it is a distinct mechanism, but looking at that approach and applying it to an organisation that, I mean, if you look at the activities of Palestine Action and Just Stop Oil, I mean, there have been a number of arrests for the either criminal sabotage, for the systematic blocking of roads. Yet this is carrying on. I mean, the organisations were live tweeting, asking people. So clearly, the activities themselves being offences is not proving a sufficient deterrent. And yet organisations are free to raise money, to advertise, and actually, if you are, your mode is clearly using criminality to coerce the democratic process and to make the lives of the public a misery, if that is the effect of it, then I think it is reasonable to look at ways in which you could restrict that more effectively.
I think, Camilla, what we found reading into it, the work you've done, Michael Gove's speech itself, which talks so deeply and powerfully about the Jewish experience, particularly of being in London with these regular marches that are so intimidating for so many Jewish people and others. I think it is a very nuanced area, isn't it? And I would encourage everyone to read not only Michael Gove's speech, but also your report and actually realise this is a complicated area where there's no black and white answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I took some time over my review.
Yes, we can tell.
and I decided to write at length on it. So
it's needed. I think it's needed, that length and the transparency of the process here. Just give us a quick timeline about what will happen now and when we might see some results.
Well, I'm interested in this question as well, obviously. I was able to talk to the Home Secretary and the Policing Minister yesterday. I mean, they are clear that they wanted to act on my desire to get this published as quickly as possible after I formally submitted. And to credit to them, I mean, it only took them about a week from it's been in the system in draft form within Whitehall for a number of months, but formal submitted to Prime Minister and Home Secretary. They got it out almost immediately as I asked. They have said, I think they were intending to say that this will need some thought and they'll come back. But they are indicating that they want to move quickly in considering it. So I hope that's true, and so I'm obviously keen to keep pushing them along this road. And indeed, the opposition. I mean, Labour are clearly taking this really seriously. Their own MPs are under levels of strain and threat just as much as government MPs. They see the environment, and so I hope that there can be as much of a cross-party consensus across the mainstream of politics on the need to do better at championing our parliamentary democracy and upholding it, rather than sort of seeing those who actually don't respect it and want to undermine it, and in some cases completely destroy it, as being legitimate actors.
Lord Walney, thank you very much indeed for joining us in the Daily Tea studio to discuss this epic report. Thank you.
Thanks, Camilla. Thanks, Kamal.
Kamal, let's talk about the International Criminal Court. Here on in, let's refer to it as the ICC, so it isn't too much of a mouthful. These arrest warrants that have been issued, so Benjamin Netanyahu has been issued with an arrest warrant, so too have Hamas leaders. They've been issued on both sides, but what I find intriguing is the international response to that. So we've had Rishi Sunak today saying that he thinks the application is deeply unhelpful. He was once again speaking in Vienna. He's had a busy morning in Vienna, speaking on a lot of different subjects. And he's effectively said that it would make no difference to aid getting into Gaza and reaching a sustainable ceasefire. He said this, I note. The timing's curious, Kamal, because I thought he might say something about this yesterday when the ICC announced this. He waited, I think, for Joe Biden to come out against the warrants. Biden said that he felt that they were outrageous and that there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. So is the British Prime Minister a little late to the party here?
I think that Rishi Sunak has to wait to see which way the American president is going to lean on different issues. It is important that the coalition that is still supportive of Israel, despite many, many criticisms of the actions in Gaza, stays together. And I'm sure that the Prime Minister is considering that before he responds. He doesn't want to seem to be in a split with America. It'll be interesting to see how Keir Starmer, who at this stage hasn't said anything directly, responds to this. David Lammy, the shadow foreign secretary for the Labour Party, has said that despite the controversy that you've outlined about what the ICC has done, or what the ICC did yesterday, Lammy has said Britain is a proud member of international legal agreements, and it therefore has to back what the ICC does after its deliberations about Israeli behaviour, as you say, but also the atrocities of Hamas.
But I think that's a bit of a fudge so far. I mean, I think it's interesting, the timing. Maybe Starmer was waiting for Sunak, who was waiting for Biden. That might be the chain of events. But it's interesting that the Labour leader hasn't felt the need to make a comment on the appropriateness of the arrest warrants, you know, arresting members of a democratically elected government versus arresting leaders of a prescribed terrorist group. I'm just putting it out there that it's interesting that he's holding his tongue, forever caught in this tug of war between different sentiments towards Israel within his own party. And also, you were discussing this earlier, as a former lawyer himself, somebody who very much wants to adhere to international law. But I'm just saying, I think Lammy's putting Labour in a holding position there.
The judges of the ICC will now decide on the next stage, and we'll keep you updated on that. But let's move on to Scarlett Johansson.
Oh, why not?
So, Camilla, get your popcorn. This is going to take a little bit of explanation because it's involving a Hollywood star and ChatGPT, the AI assistant, which I'm sure many of us have used. Now, it was developing a new voice-activated video assistant, and it asked Scarlett Johansson 9 months ago, could we use your voice? Sam Altman, the founder of ChatGPT, actually asked Scarlett Johansson directly. She said, no, I don't think you'll be using my voice for this lovely video assistant. 2 days before its official launch, 2 weeks ago, Sam Altman goes back to Scarlett Johansson's team and asks again, and she says no again. Then ChatGPT 4.0 is launched, and according to Scarlett Johansson, one of the voices they use, called Sky, does sound, to her ears at least, and to many others, very similar to her own voice. Now, Johansson's legal team have written 2 letters to ChatGPT demanding to know what has happened and how this voice, which she says is similar, has appeared on this new ChatGPT version.
Should we have another listen? Now, this is Sky, which is the name of the ChatGPT assistant.
In fact, we've got a new announcement to make.
That's exciting. Announcements are always a big deal. Judging by the setup, it looks like it's going to be quite the professional production. Is this announcement related to OpenAI, perhaps?
It is.
I'm intrigued.
And in fact, what if I were to say that you're related to the announcement, or that you are the announcement?
Me? The announcement is about me? Well, color me intrigued. Are you about to reveal something about AI? Or more specifically about me as a part of OpenAI? You've got me on the edge of my, well, I don't really have a seat, but you get the idea.
Notwithstanding the weirdness of that conversation, Kamal,
Yes.
let's now listen to the real Scarlett Johansson.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Samantha. Good morning, Theodore.
Good morning.
You have a meeting in 5 minutes. You want to try getting out of bed?
You're too funny.
Okay, good, I'm funny. I want to learn everything about everything.
Just to explain, that is Scarlett Johansson in a film called Her, in which she plays an AI robot, right?
She does, and apparently is Sam Altman's favourite movie, but that's all by the by. Now, this is Kamal Ahmed quoting Scarlett Johansson, just to be absolutely clear
Yes.
that I'm not Scarlett Johansson, just for anyone who's watching this on YouTube or listening to it. So she said, and she did an interview or gave a statement to National Public Radio in the United States, which I think has led on a lot of this story. She said, "I was shocked, angered and in disbelief that Mr. Altman would pursue a voice that sounded so eerily similar to mine that my closest friends and news outlets could not tell the difference. In a time when we are grappling with deepfakes and the protection of our own likeness, our own work, our own identities, I believe these are questions that deserve absolute clarity."
Shall we give Sam Altman's response to that? In the interest of balance, Kamal. He said, "We cast the voice actor behind Sky's voice before any outreach to Miss Johansson. Out of respect for Miss Johansson, we have paused using Sky's voice in our products. We are sorry to Miss Johansson that we didn't communicate better."
Well, we'll step over the appalling use of the word pause there, but it sounds frivolous sometimes, these types of debates, but they do go to the heart of the AI revolution that we are living through. These new models, generative language models, are able to mimic human behaviour in a much closer way than we've ever seen before. It's a real Jekyll and Hyde technology, because today I was reading in the Telegraph this morning that the cancer detecting ability of AI is astonishing and beats human beings tenfold. And it's amazing at spotting cancer in scans. And at the same time, we have what might seem a little frivolous Hollywood actors, sort of who cares. But it's really important because the ownership of creative work really matters. And what you get here is these technology companies going far too fast to get the next product out. Move fast and break things has always been a quote from Silicon Valley, and that is always the danger.
I'm concerned about the march of AI generally as a journalist. Are we going to be replaced in the newsroom? I'm just looking out onto here by robots. I'm also concerned about it as a woman. We've had a case here, haven't we, of Kathy Newman, the Channel 4 newsreader, whose face was superimposed onto a porn film. Deep fake porn is something that I think a lot of women worry about, and then not even in the public eye. In this case, I wonder whether Sam Altman would have behaved like this towards a male actor. If, for instance, he had gone to George Clooney and said, "We'd like to use your voice for our AI-generated assistant," and he had said no, might have left it at that. I mean, notwithstanding the fact that Sam Altman seems to perhaps have a slight thing for Scarlett Johansson, and particularly that film Her, why is it always women that seem to be being slightly objectified? Are there shades of that? There's a kind of casual sexualization that creeps into any discussion of women, AI, robots, or am I being oversensitive?
No, I think there is this domination, this notion of the male gaze, and it dominates a lot of technology, a lot of engineering. Obviously, huge male dominance in terms of engineering firms, tech firms. And if you go back and look at the examples, of course, Facebook started as a way of ranking women. How horrible that sounds. If you look at the films about technology, I can still remember Weird Science, which was all about how some young kids modelled their ideal girlfriend.
Yeah, ended up with Kelly LeBrock, I think.
They did, but the whole narrative is around, yes, that objectification, this notion of the flirtatious woman and the way all that operates. But we were chatting about it. You felt that Alexa, Camilla, had actually got this more right than wrong. I must admit, I don't use Alexa, so I'm in your very technologically safe hands.
I don't use it that much, but I just hear the children sort of shouting at her.
And apologies to all our audience who we've just sparked off their Alexa, if they have one. So apologies for that.
Apologies for that. But Alexa's sort of quite standard, non-sexualized. Sort of, there isn't any kind of strange, slightly pseudo-pornographic intrigue in her voice. It's just a straight female voice in the same vein as the voice that makes the announcements on the tube. There is, I think, an impetus towards putting female voices on these things and not male, but I just feel there's something slightly pernicious creeping in. And I think, as is ever the case, women seem to be more at threat by some of these technological advances.
For those of our listeners who don't go on the tube very much, the tube announcement on Mind the Gap goes something like, Mind the Gap.
Yeah, it's quite authoritarian,
yes.
But at the same time, sort of reassuringly so. And you talked about tech bros there. I mean, the other problem perhaps is how many women are in the room when it comes to these sorts of Silicon Valley innovations. Also, there's something vaguely sexist about the idea that any AI assistant has to be female. I mean, what? So we're basically saying that when it comes to being helped technologically, that it needs to be a woman because women are typically secretaries in real life. I just find that a little bit derogatory.
Could do with some increased diversity in Silicon Valley, I think. But luckily, Camilla, you and I are real. This has been us. This has been the end of another Daily Tea, and I'm sure we will never be replaced, female or male, by ChatGPT.
In fact, if this Daily Tea podcast goes well enough, Kamal, we could soon be saying, mind the gap.